Back in the day, they used to make this Benadryl spray. Fucking stupid idea knowing what Benadryl is. I was a kid with the worst sunburn ever, and I didn't understand I could overdose on the stuff. I had never done drugs before, and probably didn't understand what drugs were yet. The sunburn was infected, and I had a fever. My whole back was ripped apart and leaking fluid, as were the backs of my legs, and I was in great pain. So I did what the bottle said to do and applied it to the affected area, my entire back and legs, which were of course open wounds too. I ignored that part. After I had finished, I realised I'd probably gone through half the bottle just on my back. I had more Benadryl though, so I also dosed the syrup in the pill form. I then tried to sleep. At first my clothes are very uncomfortable, so I stripped them off, but the bedsheet still feels like it is cutting into the wound on my back, so I pulled that off as well. When I was a kid, of course, I was afraid of monsters. But not just any monsters. Aliens were my monster of choice. Aliens, of course, really exist, and aren't fake at all like other monsters, and they also like to abduct children and do terrible things to them, so it's good to be scared of them. Taking my covers and clothing off had removed my alien shield, since they obviously will need direct access to my naked body if they are to experiment. I knew this, but I couldn't do anything about it since clothes hurt so damn much to wear, and sheets were even unbearable. At this point the drug was kicking in. I did the smart thing and tried to rationalise that aliens didn't exist. I don't know how this shit works, but at some point in my rationalisation, I looked out my open window to see, very plainly, that nothing was out there and that nothing could get me. I was feeling calm when a stereotypical grey alien suddenly opened his eyes, like I'd been looking at him the entire time, but was not seeing his face because his eyes were closed. I exploded from bed and ran down the hall naked, screaming. My parents burst out of their room, and they started screaming and I was screaming, and they screamed something at me about what happened, and I screamed back, "The Greys!" I should mention that I can't remember how old I was, but I was certainly too old to be running down the halls screaming whenever I got scared. This wasn't fear, it was a panic reflex. After that I went back and fell asleep, woke up paralysed. I think I must have sleep apnea or something, but I never got that shit checked. Waking up with sleep paralysis in the middle of delirium is not fucking fun. I was convinced the aliens came back and abducted me, and I couldn't move or speak save for a thin, raspy repeated, "Help me, wake me up," during all of it. Yes, I do have the full abduction story that I can't blame drugs 100% for. They came to my room and I saw them at the foot of my bed. I never saw the ship because I told them, with my mind how else, after they arrived, that the reason humans were always scared of them was because of an inbuilt thing in their psyche that made us frightened of all other humanoid species. I rationalised to the aliens this was true. I told them to look at human-on-human conflict. I told them also that I was not trying to be rude or mean, and they weren't disgusting to behold, just that they were scary to me. I said the paralysis made it even worse. The aliens were very nice and told me they would put me to sleep, so I would know that I was being abducted and could feel it, but I wouldn't be able to see them. This was my suggestion, but they understood my thoughts so well that they knew what I wanted to ask. Then my eyes closed, and I could feel them touching me and injecting me in my chest with a long needle, and it hurt bad, so I scrunched up my eyes so they'd be closed even more. When I did that, the aliens stopped injecting me for a second, and I got really numb and I couldn't feel anything, but their arms holding my arms down. I remained paralysed, but to pass the time and try to break the obvious unreality of my horrible nightmare, I mentally counted the fingers on each hand grabbing me, figuring that if they had less than 4, then they couldn't be real, because they couldn't fucking hold things like needles. To my surprise, they were very long, nailless, and it seemed like I could always feel at least 5 digits, spread out palm flat on my chest, the needle in between them. For the naysayers, yes, I remember this part vividly. I remember the hands were very firm, not soft at all, but also not bony. Working hands. Doctor's hands, my mind said. I remember they never once grabbed me to hold me down, and I thought at the time that it would be awkward to make a fist with such long fingers. They always touched me with their fingers lengthwise. If they needed to hold my arm, it was done at the elbow with several fingers extended onto my bicep and 2 digits holding my forearm. I woke up to a violent seizure and more sleep paralysis. Sleep paralysis continues to this day. The sleep seizures continued at least for a week afterward. Fucking every night, and they were always preceded by sleep paralysis and another abduction. Each abduction happened like the last one. The aliens came at around 3 o'clock. I stayed up for them because I was scared. I could feel them coming. I'd suddenly fall asleep, then wake up. My eyes wouldn't open though, and I could feel them doing stuff to me. When they were done, they would leave at about 5 AM. I lost the hours and it felt like only minutes. The seizure would begin at the end and continue on, it seemed, into daylight when I actually woke up. Of course, from being jolted around by seizure. Today, I sleep crappy and am still scared of aliens. I also had this peculiar bump on my chest where I thought I had been injected. It developed days after the initial abduction, and I remember I thought there was a needle hole sealing up on top of it. During PE in high school, I got hit by a baseball on that exact spot, my sternum. It became mysteriously infected despite the fact there was no cut, and since my sunburn I haven't had an infection. I pulled a piece of metal out of it, but for some reason I imagined that had to be a piece of zipper embedded in my chest after the baseball impact, and I threw it away. To sum it up, I'm still not sure whether or not I was abducted by aliens. I have had problems sleeping since that day. My mind was seriously fucked for years afterward, and I would keep on getting abducted until I passed puberty. I probably have lingering psychotic effects, and occasionally I break into a state of mind which I would describe as a flashback. My face gets red and I start to think like I am tripping again. I then exhibit all the symptoms of schizophrenia I can in a short time span, and return to normal within half an hour. Even with my drug knowledge now, my experience with psychedelics, and a sitter, I'd have to think very long about trying this shit again. And yes, I realise how batshit insane that story sounds. Taking a cataclysmic amount of a terrible drug when I was like 10 years old definitely coloured my perception of that night's event. I emphasise the fact even now. I only know I must have been tripping, because I fucking poured Benadryl into my gullet until it seeped out my pores, and was then abducted by aliens. If the Benadryl bit didn't happen, the aliens would have seemed completely believable.